conference. Now, as mentioned earlier, this year the conference is titled Accelerating and Reinforcing Transformative Change for Societal Resilience. And what we want to do is to understand how do we move forward rapidly and efficiently, and not just mitigating harm, but to effectively achieve positive impacts on people's lives, livelihoods, and on nature. And if we are looking to do that, then what are some of the pathways and approaches that would lead to these positive impacts? Now, when we talk about transformations, one important transformation that we need to work towards and are working towards is sustainable food systems, and therein the need to manage post harvest food loss and food waste. Now, there's enough evidence to support the critical role of managing food loss and waste, whether it is to enhance food and nutrition security, to avoid resource wastage, bolster efforts to combat climate change, or to support sustainable livelihoods. Now, this is an area of research and intervention for CRB. We've been working on it, and we're very happy to collaborate and work with WRI. And I'm extremely delighted to have with us today Dr. Ruchika Singh, Director of the Sustainable Landscapes and Restoration at WRI India, joined by Ms. Monica Agarwal, the Senior Manager for the Landscape and Restoration Program. So, Ruchika and Monica, welcome. Absolutely delighted, and I'm looking forward to this opportunity to share with a wider audience on some of the work that we've been looking at or the discussions that we've been talking about. So, just to start, and for the benefit of the audience, Ruchika, the reduction of food loss and waste has been fairly high on WRI and FOLU's agenda. And based on the research that you've undertaken earlier, would you like to just highlight some key areas of intervention when we talk about managing this critical issue and how WRI has been engaging on this issue? So, Ruchika, over to you. Thanks.
Thanks, Devyani. Yeah. Thanks first for inviting us here. Delighted to be part of this conversation. And of course, CRB is a valued partner for us. On this journey, which we started last year when we were part of the sustainability conference last year as well, and we discussed key issues around food loss and waste. Just to kind of, back up a little in terms of why we've been talking about food loss and waste in India. So it started out for us in the India. WRI, of course, globally has been working on food loss and waste issues, and is a known leader, both looking at issues around what are the protocols that are important when we think about target, measure, act, or bringing together a set of champions who can inspire, enable, mobilize action on food loss and waste, which is the Champions 12.3. My colleague Monica will, of course, talk about that a bit more. But in India, we started working on this a bit more when we launched Food and Land Use India Coalition, the India platform part of it, where we were, FOLU basically globally has identified 10 critical transitions that are important for a sustainable food and land use system. This was a global report, the Growing Better report that has been launched. In India, we have identified six critical transitions that are important for food and land use systems, and within that, food loss and waste is one of the important transitions, which WRI India has been taking lead within the FOLU platform. And we've been working on research to look at what are the key issues to consider to reduce food loss and waste. What is the state of the knowledge when we think about food loss and waste in India? What are the recommended strategies and practical solutions to manage food loss and waste, as well as the gaps in research policy and practice? I think you summarized it quite well in terms of no one can really underscore how important it is from the sustainability perspective to reduce food loss and waste, both from the social, economic, and the environmental benefits that can be there, given the loss of resources that is happening in the farm could for production of food such as water, land, energy, capital, etc. There's a lot that is being lost, which if it's not lost, can help in reducing the emissions. Of course, globally, the 8% of emissions are contributing to food loss and waste, and if it was its own country, it would be the third largest country on food loss and waste. So there is obviously a lot happening. So at WRI India, we've started with looking systematically on key issues that are important for food loss and waste. We started this, as I was saying earlier, with the at the CRB event last year. We started discussing key issues to consider, and I'm gonna now pass on to my colleague Monica to talk a little bit more about where we've come from there in terms of the study findings that we just recently launched, as well as our next few steps. Thanks.
Thank you, Devyani. Thanks, Ruchika, for setting the ground so well. So I'll just take on from where Ruchika left. So one of the very initial work for us was to understand what is the state of knowledge on food loss and waste in India. Where is it happening? Why is it happening? Who has a role in reducing food loss and waste? So we launched a working paper on food loss and waste, and its title actually reflected our findings. There are more unknowns on food loss and waste in India than we know about it in terms of data and research. And this research actually helped us in setting the agenda forward. One of the critical finding was that we do have a good amount of research on post-harvest losses. That is the amount of losses that happen between the producer and by the time it reaches the markets, that's at the farm level or at the transport, storage, or processing level. We do have a bit of data on post-harvest losses, but the important thing is this data that exists in different studies is not comparable because of difference in the frameworks and metrics used by them. And that really hampers the knowledge on understanding a specific crops in terms of what are the critical loss points in the supply chain of that crop and where are the geographical hotspots. Say rice is very different from millets, food grains are very different from fruits and vegetables, fisheries are totally different, milk is totally different. So every commodity, we need to understand what and where are these critical loss points. Then only we can possibly uh, have evidence-based or data-based strategies or solutions to address this challenge. So this was one very critical finding. And another critical finding was that there is very little on food waste, and for a long time it's an accepted notion that food waste is a developed world problem and post harvest losses is more a low income or medium income problem because we lack infrastructure to store, to process, we lack roads, we probably don't have good energy infrastructure. So it's understood that post harvest losses is more a developing world problem. So in India, I don't know, maybe this is the reason that there is very little on food waste, but a substantial food waste happens at the retail, consumer, and service level. And very recently, this notion was dispelled by the United Nations Food Waste Index report, which estimated that in India, we are wasting around 50 kgs per capita annually food. But again, the interesting thing was the Indian estimates were based on only three studies. So there were just three studies they could find, and therein also the sample size was not very clear, or it was too small to make comparison. But nonetheless, globally, it said that income of the country, overall income or economy of the country, it doesn't matter how much food we are wasting. So I'm just laying this out because one of the important critical gaps to address this huge challenge of food loss and waste is in terms of research and data available, the evidence. And because we don't have enough evidence, that's why maybe it is not on the agenda of government and public and private as much as it should be. Though in recent times there have been increase in awareness around it, but not as much as it should be there for such a critical issue. So, based on this, we also found that there are very few organizations that are actively working on reducing food loss and waste, and it's really not on agenda of public or private institutions. So from all this different we were also talking to different stakeholders, and one of the things that was coming out again and again in the conversations around food loss and waste is we lack concerted effort on food loss and waste. So there was this need that was emerging, probably for different stakeholders to bring them together in one room, and then talk about food loss and waste, because it's the challenge that needs everyone's support to when it comes to food loss and waste. It's not one person's or one organization's job. We need to build a momentum around it. Probably we need to push this on the agenda. So that's where Friends of Champions came up. It's a global movement. WRI has been part of it in other countries, but in India, that's the first step we have taken. And through Friends of Champions, we are hoping that different stakeholders will be able to come together and talk about this challenge in a more systematic manner that this sector needs. I'm going to pause here for a bit. Devyani, do you want to come in?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks a lot, Ruchika. Thanks a lot, Monica. I think very succinctly put. And our own research, complements it quite well because data is a problem. But I think also looking at the whole value chain approach, that is very important when we are looking at managing this because that becomes very critical. But I think, Monica, all the points that you've raised on, and I think one thing on food waste I'd like to highlight, and it's a point that you interestingly brought about also, that food waste management is not about just handling the waste that is generating and converting it into compost or reusing, but we actually have to look at how do we reduce the quantity of food waste itself. How do we work with mindsets, how do we work with consumers, and through our own research, we are also trying to put together some case studies that what are some of those great practices when it comes to managing food loss and waste. And companies, and Ruchika, you brought this about the target, measure, and act, that there are companies which are actively trying to see that through their operations, can they use technology to understand that how much food is being wasted, can they actually reduce that wastage, can they reward that, can they measure that. So I think some interesting initiatives happening, but absolutely right that it needs more concerted effort. It probably needs a much sharper focus, right? And it's sort of embedded in some policies, but can we actually bring it up front? So absolutely, I think that is great. Just leading to that, and this is quite exciting because we are also looking forward to build work together on this. Is that Ruchika, you mentioned that we started work, the last conference. So, Monica, if I can just pick your brains, that this year you've already touched upon on some of the initiatives that you started, but how do you looking to build on those conversations from last year? And what is the objective at the session? And there's a very interesting title we've come up with, that managing food loss and waste, but policy, practice, and partnership. So, can we unpack that title a bit for our audience?
Sure. Yes. Yes, indeed. So, uh, the title is "Reducing Roadmap for Reducing Food Loss and Waste in India: Policy, Practice, and Partnerships." So I think the way we have been looking at it together, both organizations, CRB, WRI. So, like I also said a while ago, so I didn't touch upon policy though, but we all know that it's so fragmented in India. There are several ministries and departments involved in different aspects of post-harvest management, none on food waste. So it's like it's nobody's agenda. None of For none of the departments per se, though there has been so much focus on augmenting post-harvest infrastructure. So we need probably right incentives. That's where the role of the policy comes. We need right incentives for all actors in the supply chain to reduce food loss and waste. So that's what we want to look at: how to enable that ecosystem in India, that we have enabling policies, data-driven policies for food loss and waste reductions in India. And of course practice. I said so much around research and data, but to have targeted interventions, actions that actually can spot on the critical loss points or the hotspots of food loss and waste. To build practice or interventions around that, we need more systematic measurement of food loss and waste. So that's where the role of practice comes in. And of course, it's a multi-stakeholder challenge. We know there are so many actors involved in a food supply chain, in a food value chain. So role of collaborations, role of partnerships, I think is very, very critical, whether it's investment, whether it's technology, whether it's knowledge, whether it's innovations, whether it's equitable finance, because we also know so 80% of our producers are smallholder producers, so our problem is different from the rest of the world, so we need to deal it accordingly. So there's a role of policy. We definitely need a different kind of practice now in India going forward. And of course, it's not possible without effective enabling partnerships. So that's how this title is. It's certainly very heavy, but I think that's what we need for any amount of food loss and waste reductions in India. Ruchika, what would you like to?
Thanks, Monica. You've covered it quite succinctly. Just a couple of points to add there. I think we're quite excited about this jointly developing an action agenda on food loss and waste, and that's what the CRB, the event at the sustainability conference that we are doing in partnership with FOLO, CRB, and of course WRI India. We want to look at what are the key issues, how do we develop that action agenda or roadmap, and I think that that's where the policies, practice, and partnership come in. You The food loss waste issue is so complex, you can't do it alone. We have to this requires a lot of us coming together and thinking through of what are the key issues to handle, and I'll tell you why this is important. I think Monica already mentioned, in context of policies, the fragmented there is a lot of fragmented approach, in the sense that there are a lot of policy interventions which are focusing on largely focused on augmenting post harvest losses, for instance, including cold chain infrastructure, but there's a lot more that needs to be done if we need to do it right. We have the SDG 12.3, a goal where target 12.3 specifically talks about how does the world reduce food loss and waste across production and supply chain, including post harvest losses by 2030. Unfortunately, though, India doesn't have we are not really measuring this target of 12.3. So from the policy perspective, understanding how do we start working with data gaps and start thinking about, can we also start at least measuring where this is. Starting with measuring the target would be one, for instance, to look at. The incentives point that Monica made is a very important one. Again, lack of data um, is a crucial barrier. How do we sort of do as a create more data through case studies? And I think Devyani, what you mentioned about CRB's own work, where you're looking at developing case studies and understanding what are the key pain points that one needs to be addressed, and these would be across the supply chain. So how do we sort of work at different value chain barriers, and that's where the practice issue sort of comes in, because eventually reducing food loss and waste is not just good for the environment, but it's actually very good for improving farmer incomes and livelihoods, also improving livelihood of all the actors around the value chain. So there are a lot of social economic benefits as well, apart from the environmental benefits that are there. So how do we sort of look towards, what are in the practice part of it, what are the forward or the backward linkages that need to be worked in a value chain becomes important. We've been seeing from our own sort of learnings with, for instance, the Land Accelerator South Asia, there are entrepreneurs who are already starting to work and developing innovative solutions to reduce food loss and waste. We need more of that, so that we can learn from the bottlenecks and develop an action plan on how do we reduce that. So more partnerships are needed on that, and that's where the partnership point, and which Monica quite succinctly pointed about. The partnership is about bringing diverse group of stakeholders who obviously are not using the same hat to think about it. We need to think about, how do we develop a research agenda, but also think about key issues when it comes to market on the policy side, but also on the the people side of it. How do we sort of get these different stakeholders to work together so that we can develop an action agenda around it? The gender issue is a very important one which needs to be highlighted. So which our own study also found when we in the working paper, that there isn't enough data on or gender disaggregated research, for instance, on food loss and waste. So having a more streamlined sort of action plan just on understanding how technology solutions could also help reducing food loss and waste. I mean, could be about women and entrepreneurs, but also other marginalized groups. So how do we make the whole incentive issue is also about looking at a more intersectional dimensions when we think about barriers that need to be reduced. Thanks. Back to you, Divya.
Thanks a lot. I think very well captured. And this is exactly what we're looking at, that, there is an understanding of the issues. Now, how do we move towards the action agenda, right? How do we start prioritizing? Like you said, it's such a complex issue. And Ruchika, thanks for bringing the point that unless we start putting targets under policy, not just incentives, but a policy goal is in place, that what is it we are aspiring to and how do we do, I think we will not get much done. So definitely looking forward to build on the understanding and work with the different stakeholders. And I think, Ruchika, you partly touched upon also, but I would like to sort of wrap up now and say that, and I think all of us understand that we need everyone to come together and collaborate, right? We need the policy to set very clear targets, to provide the incentives, to emphasize the need to do this in a very targeted manner and a priority manner. So what is a call for action? We don't have to be very specific, but calling out the different stakeholders to come and participate. How can different stakeholders engage on this issue of managing food loss and waste? What is our ask to them? If you want to just take a quick stab, and this is a question for both of you. So, Ruchika, if you want to start, and Monica comes in then.
Thanks, Devyani. I can so just picking up on the point about the Champions 12.3 and the Friends of Champion 12.3 that Monica mentioned earlier as well. So globally, just learning from some of the experiences that we've had, globally there is a network of coalition of actors, of leaders, governments, businesses, and civil society that have come together, which is called the Champions 12.3, to inspire, enable, and measure, and see how do we reduce food loss and waste. What we are sort of the journey that we are going on together is looking at developing a network of Friends for Champion 12.3. And this is an open call for action for all partners to come together to see how do we co-create this agenda in terms of what Monica mentioned about, there are so many data gaps in terms of research issues. How do you harmonize or measure food loss and waste? What really is the yardstick? How can we do it together? What sort of case studies become important? How do we think about gender issues, for instance, within that? So the Champions 12.3 is the Friends of Champion 12.3 is supposed to be that action agenda, setting agenda coalition, which will bring some of these people together. And at the CRB event, we are hoping to discuss these issues under the buckets of policy, practice, and partnerships a bit more to see how we get that. And we are quite delighted that CRB has, joined the Friends of Champion 12.3 as well. I'm going to just stop with that and ask Monica to come in. Thanks.
Right, just adding on to what Ruchika was saying. So, Friends of Champions is very important for us. I think for anyone who's interested in reducing food loss and waste in India. But Friends of Champions is just the beginning. I think what we aim for and what the call of action from our side as Champions 12.3 is that we want everyone who is involved in food business, companies, governments, entrepreneurs, anyone, the call of action is target, measure, act. We need to set targets for reductions of food loss and waste. We need to start measuring it. Then only we will know where to act. What are the hotspots? So target, measure, act in the long run. That's where we want to be, and that's our one of the call of actions for everyone, companies, government, anyone, research organizations. And I think as Champions 12.3, there is one more call of action. That's we are already talking about pre and post COVID world. So post COVID-19, I think we need to integrate food loss and waste reduction strategies in the work we are doing. We already know how what importance agriculture has in India in terms of livelihoods and employment and everything else. So build back better. That's a very important phrase that's coming up. So food loss and waste reductions need to be part of any work that we do uh, post COVID or as post COVID-19 response strategies.
Yeah. Thanks a ton, Ruchika Monica. Absolutely delighted to be part of this network. I recall this conversation when Richard brought, and I was like, absolutely, because this is very close to our heart. And like Monica said, that I don't think we can afford any longer not to have it on a priority agenda. That to have it right up there. It is a very important part of building forward better, as we like to call it, and not building back also. So I think we are absolutely delighted to be part of it, and we look forward. And thank you so much for giving such a wonderful view into the session, because as part of the session, we are looking to engage with the different stakeholders, and we are looking to develop an action agenda which is not defined by us, but which is really defined by the stakeholders, because they would be the ones who would help deliver on that agenda, right? And actually convert it into action, into ground. So for me today, some of the things that I've clearly heard is the action agenda, the data, the very evidence based approach that we are trying to drive and push forward. And this is something that we're absolutely looking forward to, and looking forward to the session at the conference. So thank you so much, both of you, for taking the time, and let's keep working at it and get more and more people into the network. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Devyani. Thank
Thank
you.
you. Delighted.
Yeah, bye bye.
Yeah. Bye.
Bye.